Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out here this evening, and welcome to the lab, to Small Press Traffic, and to this mini-series entitled Antagonisms of Reality, Problems of Form. My name is Violet Spurlock, and I'm very happy to be introducing tonight Anna Moschovakis and Poupeh Missaghi, who are both visiting us from out of town. I'd like to thank Sid Steide, Madeline Hernandez, Kevin Lowe, and everyone else at Small Press Traffic for helping bring this series to fruition. And I'd also like to invite you to our next reading, which will happen Friday, January 13th, also here at the lab, featuring Benjamin Krusling and Alex Cruz. Before I introduce our first reader, I'd like to just say a few brief words about the series as a whole. It takes its title from a line in Adorno's aesthetic theory, wherein he claims that art most effectively engages politics not through direct representation, but through the sublimation of the unsolved antagonisms of reality into problems of form. I wanted to take this claim not as a maxim, but a hypothesis to be re-examined in our current moment, one in which the function and power of both representation and formal innovation is rapidly changing. I was looking for work which seemed to be asking what is formally required of writing that wants to attune itself to struggle, violence, and marginalization, not offering those subjects up to a reader as themes like any other, but taking seriously the possibility that such conditions, properly understood, would rewrite the basic terms of experience and expression. Such work often seems to transcend individual authorship, to bring us both into joyful forms of togetherness and into the chilling discourses of institutions. I see this work as deeply tied with the conversations and readings that have taken place over the years at Small Press Traffic, and I'm very happy that we're gathering here. So we're going to start with Anna Moschovakis, whose new book, Participation, is available for sale at the front. And I'm going to read some thoughts that came up for me while reading it. To put it a bit dramatically, Anna Moschovakis writes as if intimacy isn't a choice, and also as if we do not know what it looks like. Her new novel, Participation, a story about two overlapping reading groups named Love and Anti-Love, makes probing inquiries into what it is we want from stories, reading, and groups. She writes, because the universe itself was rearranging, individuals began rearranging their own universes as well, all sent into a new state of entropy, emphasizing the cosmic material determinism of love, dependence, and entanglement. Her writing is acutely attuned to the inner life of characters questing to escape their own characterhood, to embed themselves in webs of relationality that already define them, both in the sense of trying to get involved with collective projects and to discover psychic landscapes more crowded than the self. She deconstructs the basic units of fiction, like protagonist and event, while remaining committed to a technique of extreme precision that continually lands in a reality I can only describe as abstractly concrete or concretely abstract. Wondering about the opposite of agoraphobia, a character wants a word that means love of the marketplace, but not the market as a site of profit, but the site in which all must admit that any claim to self-sufficiency is a lie. The market is both inescapably oppressive for her overexploited characters and also an imaginative opportunity for reimagining social life, just as each of their crushes feels like both an attentively detailed account of reality and also, mysteriously, an illustrative example in pamphlets about relationship dynamics. What these slippages suggest is that we may most deeply discover or recognize ourselves as once we notice that we have just lost our own thread and joined a larger pattern. In the moment when we are not sure if we are kissing someone or remembering a kiss from decades gone by, organizing a radical cell or closing up a cafe. We might be articulating what gets called individual experience most honestly when the pronoun we slips into our mouths without our noticing. Let's give a warm welcome to Anna Moschovakis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really amazing to hear. I feel seen. Thank you. My book feels seen. It's really great to be here and to see friends and people I have yet to meet, and wonderful to be here with you, Poupeh. I'm so excited to hear you read in a minute. Can you all hear me? Good. So I'm going to split my time and read some work in progress, and then do I'm going to attempt for the first time a hyper-abridged version of the book. We'll see how that goes. But first I'm going to read from a poem. It's 7:39. I'm saying that out loud so that I remember. So I'm working on a book of longish poems, which is I think is going to be called now I've forgotten what it's going to be called. I think it's called When I Move Toward You, This Movement Is All I Am. I think that's it. I might be getting a word wrong. And this is a long poem called Preliminary Notes on Risk. And I'm just going to read the first section, and it engages in the second section, not this section, with the book In Praise of Risk by Anne Dufour-Montel. But I don't think I get there yet in this section. Preliminary Notes on Risk. 1. I keep saying I want to write about what really matters, but what if that can only mean what really matters to me? That's the first problem. I've often said about writers that their writing keeps me company, that all I want is to keep others company too. Anyone other, anyone. I have questions. What matters and what matters to me and to others? And also, how does one know? When I translate, I am translating what I don't know. When I write and the writing feels alive, it is because I am writing what I know but don't yet know I know. I am writing what my writing knows but hasn't yet told me. What matters to me now, at the time of this writing, is to find a way to write through a paralyzing fear. This is personal. So personal it's hard to imagine that the writing that results could keep anyone company at all. Anyone other, even anyone. I'm writing these lines from a low, low place, wanting to die or to crawl under the bed forever, wanting to hide, which is not the same as wanting to die, which makes me want to know why the sentences arrive in that order. I want to die, I want to crawl under the bed forever, in that order. The second, a revision of the first, a backtrack. And recognizing this only makes it happen again. It makes me want to crawl deeper into the hole, farther under the bed, to disappear, which is also different from dying. Disappear from whom? From others? From every other one? I am loved. I am fortunate, even when the hole calls, even when the space below the bed calls, there is some smallest voice, some smallest flash. A flash that is not understanding, but that takes understanding's place. A phrase I wrote the other day in the context of a fiction about a person who is barely hanging on, a person who tries to write her way out. The flash that is not understanding, but that takes understanding's place, says, you are loved, you are fortunate, you are loved, and you love. And yet, I'm afraid all the time of what? Of everything. Everything. And then sometimes nothing. There is very little in between. When I'm afraid of nothing, it is not because I feel invincible. When I'm afraid of nothing, it's because I'm in a state of believing in the connection between people. Because I am feeling the connection between people momentarily. The connection between myself and another person or people. Or sometimes by proxy, sometimes I am sensing or feeling the connection between other people and I'm believing it momentarily. And in the moment in which I'm observing and believing it, I am not afraid. Connections between people are not safe. They are risky. So why does experiencing the risky connection between myself and an other, or observing the risky connection between an other and another other, make me feel safe? What is this feeling of safety? What does safety mean? Safety is probably the wrong word. One of the reasons it's so hard to write about what really matters is that it's so easy to use the wrong word. It is always only possible to use the wrong word. We know that there is no right word, but we still hold ourselves accountable. We both believe and don't believe that there is a right word and a wrong word. Who is this we? We is probably the wrong word too. Safety in the sense of security is not what I mean. Safety in the sense of security is not something I seek. Things that are secure are only secure temporarily. Security as a concept exists only because insecurity as a concept reigns, because property as a concept reigns. Safety in the sense of out of danger is also not what I mean. I covered this before. First of all, this is impossible, but also risk is inherent in connections between people. Risk is nothing if not being in danger. What I'm trying to get at is that there is something that feels safe, though that's not exactly the right word. There is something that feels safe about certain situations that are only possible because they're not safe. There's the feeling again, the one about dying, which gets replaced by the one about crawling into a hole or hiding under the bed forever. The feeling arises when I recall that even if I'm trying hard to write about what matters, especially when I'm trying the hardest to write about what matters, and to do so in a way that might just possibly keep some other company, any other, just one, that in these moments of trying to write about what really matters to me and possibly to some other as well, I'm not covering new ground. It almost makes me laugh to type out the sentence that came to mind just now. The sentence is, "Of course, I am not the first to think these thoughts, nor am I the first to write them down." It almost makes me laugh to think that such a sentence would come to mind when it is not only so obvious as to be unnecessary to articulate, it is also the kind of obvious acknowledgement that feels disingenuous, or that risks being seen as disingenuous, since it contains in itself the possibility of its opposite. It would not be necessary to articulate the negation in the idea, I am not the first to think X, Y, or Z, if there weren't some underlying belief that it might possibly be possible that despite the protestations, the I in the sentence, I cannot accept that that I is me, since I only thought about writing the sentence, but didn't until I decided to write about the sentence and its problems, which is not the same as simply writing the sentence directly, as if I trusted it to say what it matters. If there weren't some underlying belief that it might possibly be possible that, despite the protestations, the I in the sentence believes themselves capable of being the first to think X, Y, or Z. Now another sentence comes to mind regarding this hesitation to accept that the I is me. The sentence, "The lady doth protest too much," which is a sentence I have known as if always, a sentence I don't remember learning, that I don't recall being taught. A sentence among the many sentences that were fed to me somehow and got tagged in my brain as worth remembering, but for whatever reason, the origin of the sentence did not get tagged the same way, so I don't know the origin of the sentence. I don't know the origin of the sentence as it was first presented to me, nor do I know the origin of the sentence as it was presented to the person or text that first presented it to me, nor do I know the origin of that presentation, or all the way back to the person who may have in the first place made the sentence. For the first time, I mean, if a person can make a sentence for the first time. I don't even know if the sentence as it was presented to me was a sentence I was receiving, as they say, in translation. I know that I could find out the history of the sentence, "The lady doth protest too much." But I could find out very easily what the agreed upon origin of the sentence is according to the people who believe the sentence matters. But I am beginning to suspect that there is a problem with this ease of finding out agreed upon origins, agreed upon meanings. The oversimplicity and ubiquity of this idea, of this suspicion that there is a problem with the ease of finding out origins and meanings, makes me want to crawl farther under the bed. But now that I am on a train of thinking, even if it's a bad train, a train that is on the wrong track, a train on a track to nowhere, Now that I am on a train, any train, it is a little bit easier not to want to die. It is a little bit easier not to want to preemptively die while on the moving train. Thinking about this almost makes me laugh. Does being on the moving train create a feeling of safety or safety, even if the train might crash? I once wrote about the feeling of relief that comes from giving over my life to a stranger, to a pilot or a surgeon, even if I don't know whether the pilot is competent or whether the surgeon has my best interests at heart. This feels dangerous to write because I don't want to suggest that this feeling is universal or defensible. I don't want to suggest that I have company in this feeling. I am afraid that having such feelings is bad, that having such feelings is a luxury, that being a person who has feelings that are a luxury is bad. The space under the bed calls, the hole calls, death calls. So many others have written about the ways in which death calls and about the connections to be made between the ways death calls and the ways in which life also calls. How can the thing that matters most to say be something that has also mattered most for so many others to say? But also, how can this not be the case? In the metaphor of tagging that I used above, in the metaphor in which things that enter our brains get tagged as worth remembering or worth forgetting or worth remembering but not consciously, a label which could be translated as worth repressing, my tagging system is all fucked up. My tagging system seems to be calibrated in exactly the wrong way, so that the things that matter most, the things I wish I could remember, are tagged either worth forgetting or worth repressing, while the things that are useless or worse than useless, the things that are toxic even to me and to others, are tagged worth remembering. Because my tagging system is fucked up, I am constantly ashamed. I'm ashamed of what I remember and of what I don't, of what I forget and of what I don't. And if I were aware of all the things I repress, I'm sure I would be ashamed of them too. When I look at the tag cloud that represents my mind, I cannot see a picture of myself that I can live with. The picture I see is one I am afraid of. It's a picture of a version of myself that forgets love and remembers fear. A version that forgets the things I have read and seen and heard, the things that have kept me company over the years. A version that forgets company matters, that company is among what has mattered most over the years. A version that remembers only the fact that I forget and am ashamed of forgetting, and only the things that I don't know I repress but am ashamed of nonetheless. It makes me laugh. I see a picture of this version of me. Version is probably the wrong word. This version of me that makes me say the sentence, I want to die, and then revise it to I want to crawl in a hole or I want to hide under the bed. I mean, in the metaphor in which my mind is a tag cloud, what matters is not what really matters. In the picture of this version of me that is unrecognizable to myself, I don't care what happens to myself. I don't keep company with myself. I disattach from myself. Let the pilot take over. The surgeon, I say to myself, whoever, I'm some, I must, or any. I'm doing math now. So that goes on. And I think it kind of relates to this book somehow. So yeah, I don't know how I'm just gonna like try and improvise. Reading from a novel is hard, right? I saw you have all these little tags. Like reading out of order is really appealing, but also can make you feel like so what I'm gonna do is set this. That was 12 minutes. I'm gonna set it for like another 12 minutes and then see what happens. How do I do this? That's not how I do it. There we go. Okay. All right, I'm going to try to get to the end in 12 minutes. But I'll start by reading the first section. Two groups. I never made it to love, and now I hear it's defunct. Anti-love meets regularly, though attendance is spotty. At least I've done most of the readings. Love, by contrast, will be a recuperation project. Anti-love is not, to be fair, billed as anti-love. It's billed variously as resistance, revolt, revolution. Sometimes it's billed, tentatively or defiantly, as self-love. Love bills itself as itself, eponymous and proud. Without the beginning of the story, it's enough to know that there is a drafty corner apartment, an all-night bodega out the window, a playground across from the bodega, quiet at night. There is an abundance of emotion, enough years, enough fucks and near fucks and pseudo fucks, enough expectations unanswered because unheard or unsaid. And it is that abundance that is known, a partial knowing, as excess is always, paradoxically, partial. Without the beginning of the story, it is insufficient, but still necessary, to have a picture of the surround. Not only the bodega and the playground, but the news reports filtering up from the apartment below. The news reports appearing at the top right of the screen. A stack of small explosions, almost registering, then compulsively swiped away. There is a stack of books on a coffee table, for example, an archive of future attention, or else a morgue. Love isn't defunct exactly. It's been reduced to a virtual form of itself, flesh into type, an assembly turned list. I enter it, when I enter it, through a screen. Don't be fooled by the present tense, the future tense, when they occur, which they will. This is a story about the past. It's already over. When I say that the story is over, I mean that a merger has happened, which is not to say an acquisition. This is a story about two groups. I'm also insisting on the safety of storytelling to protect myself and you from a certain pain. Story is a safe emergency. One of the members of Anti-Love is a psychoanalyst, a fact rarely mentioned in our meetings, though the language of that fact, safe emergency, edges in. The psychoanalyst is from Buenos Aires, where an hour of therapy can cost the same as a burger. As a result, a large portion of the population is in treatment. We absorb such unverifiable facts from conversation, and they become a part of us. They become us. Without the beginning, it is also necessary to have a picture of the second surround, some 150 miles away, a table in a room that is open to the public, dirty floor, a radiator that leaks, a village view out the window, gas station, neon lights, small mountain just behind. How are we to know who started things? At its peak, there were 10 of us in Anti-Love. We'd sit around the improvised wooden table, peer at one another over mugs of coffee or of beer. The idea for the group came from me, I've been told, though I remember it as always having been there. Not always in the strict sense. It appeared when I needed it, an acquired taste. Tonight, I met a man who was beautiful and tall, who wore capitalism like a well-fitting suit. Anti-Love recognized him, shone a light, for example. Love was different. You wonder if I have a story to tell. I was invited to love, the way salt is invited to the early winter road. I was invited and I said yes. I said, send me the syllabus. I said, I am only partially fluent in your language. I was told I was welcome, nonetheless. Meanwhile, the neighbors were setting each other on fire. California was also burning, actually burning. The neighbors, aflame, sat on their stoops, extracting the borrowed tick of love from one another's skin. It's everywhere in the news reports. Swipe, swipe. You don't have to believe me, but you can. Facts. Work. A syllabus. Another syllabus. Substitutions. More substitutions. Triangulation. Taxonomies. The news reports. The Guerrière is a book I possess but do not own. It was handed to me by a friend in a bookshop, Kansas City, Missouri, or Kansas City, Kansas, or Lawrence. You'll read it, said the friend, and then return it to me. You have 1 year, after which the deal is off, without specifying the other half of the deal. I begin it on a subway and again on a plane and again on a ferry. It begins the same each time, and each time I remember to add it to the syllabus for anti-love. Then I forget, set it aside, pick it up again on a train. It begins the same. On the cover, a topless warrior, Medusa-like, swampy grays and greens. Not topless. The warrior's breasts protrude like weapons, as if sharpened on stone. The clock is ticking. Swipe it from the screen. Say the Guerrière, golden spaces, lacunae, the green deserts are seen. They dream and speak of them. Research. The news reports. A copied paragraph. The crowd see the city around them with different eyes. They have stopped the factories producing, forced the shops to shut, halted the traffic, occupied the streets. It is they who have built the city and they who maintain it. They are discovering their own creativity. In their regular lives, they only modify presented circumstances. Here, filling the streets and sweeping all before them, they oppose their very existence to circumstances. They are rejecting all that they habitually and despite themselves accept. Once again, they demand together what none can ask alone. Why should I be compelled to sell my life bit by bit so as not to die? The rearranging universe, who we are, the unnamed elements, poses, an instability, peak, end, the news reports, fluctuations, the actual news, gaslights. 3. The middle period. 4. And the news reports. Some facts may have been misrepresented or misleadingly described. The mail did cease to arrive, but only for 2 days. It was unprecedented, but then quickly normalized into a glitch. The post office issued a terse statement arguing in effect that they'd had a pretty good run of neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night, and that with the budget cuts, the dominance of internet communication, increased competition from private carriers, and the declining health of their aging workforce, the number of postal workers shot or killed by dogs had doubled annually for the last 5 years. The young underemployed couldn't be enticed to join. They would continue to reserve the right to pause service in localized areas when acts of God rendered delivery virtually impossible. There is a version of this story in which the city where love once met, the city in which the apartment across from the cafe, the bodega, and the playground is situated, is underwater in chaos, a battleground or a breeding ground or a mass grave. You wanted a story, and that would have been a good one, ripe with analogies to our present age, rich with interpretables, a litmus test for those who read it, distributing them whether or not they were aware that their deepest responses to the narrative, the ones that protest or agree with a character's reaction to a situation of threat, distribute them thus. Along the temperamental continuum from stasis preserving to experimental, the reformers and the burners to the ground. It would have helped us, perhaps, imagine the actual future for which we are more or less bound, though without knowing when. But that isn't what happened, what's happening here. If this is a news report, it must mention a book, and if it must mention a book, it should be the desert, a poetry, a research picked up by E and S from the stack that first night and read aloud to each other, wrapped. People are snakes, swimming only to keep moving, and to which we may explicitly or not return. End of report. First figure. 17th figure, coffee, the neighboring town, what is and isn't predictable, Marina takes a break. Losses. Aloysius end stopped. Tanka. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm now going to introduce our second reader. In Poupeh Missaghi's work, I find a relentless questioning that spares none of us, not even the writer herself. And yet, the questions are so generous, so numerous in their proliferation, that they do not simply suggest an obvious answer which has been left unspoken. They seem to imply that we cannot answer and yet must keep the questions close. Her first book, Trans-Relating House 1, takes place in a Tehran where statues are going missing and corpses are piling up. The book is haunted by a cluster of language, a circular, handwritten mass of words taken from dreams, which gets larger and larger as the narrative stumbles determinedly again and again into the endless gaps and indignities of the archive. Her work explores what might often be called silenced moments, but the scrupulous additions of documentation, investigation, and analysis suggest that these sites of violence may in fact be more accurately understood as cacophonies. In that book, in the middle of a litany of questions, she asks, is a compilation of stories that leads to noise better or worse than silence? Last year in New York, I heard her read from her forthcoming book, Sound Museum, which will be released next year, and I recall this same feeling of an unthinkable noise buried underneath language. The protagonist in that book is an ex-interrogator giving a tour of a museum of torture, in which she has chosen to design the exhibit as a primarily auditory experience, finding that visual representation is fundamentally inadequate to the truth of torture. This fixation on problems of representation is everywhere in her work, but I found it crystallized in a line in the first book in which a film about the daily lives and struggles of women is only screened in international festivals far away, places where the curators pay attention to sociopolitics instead of aesthetics, instead of, not alongside. This leads her to ask, why do we always imagine a narrative of political events to always have political motives? I couldn't have better described myself the kinds of questions that led me to organizing this series, and so now I'm very happy to hear from her. Please join me in welcoming Poupeh Missaghi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Violet. That was... Can I steal that language to just represent my work? Okay, I'm gonna try to. Thanks everyone for coming. Anna, this was beautiful. I can't wait to read the next one. And I agree, there's so much conversation between the two. I'm gonna start my reading by reading some translations from these pieces of documentation from Iranians in Iran that I have started doing since the current revolutionary movement started. I'm going to read a few pieces from 3 different people, and I want to start by also giving a content warning, both for these and for my own book. So if at any point it feels too much, please feel free to step out. So these are pieces from a column called Woman, Life, Freedom that is now up on Words Without Borders journal, and the next series or the next round of pieces is coming up, I think, next week or 2. The first piece is from Somaya Norouzi. She's a writer, translator, editor, journalist, whose husband, Farshid Ghorbanpour, a bookseller and editor himself, was arrested a few weeks ago, and she writes about her visits to the prison. First, October 17, 2022. Those who are in the know agree that a phone call from this terrifying number has become our wish these days, and my wish was granted today. Farshid called. He said he was fine. He said his nose, which had been smashed, was healing. He said he had been moved with others from Evin prison to Fashofuye prison. He said he was more comfortable there. He said they were given beds to sleep on, and he could perhaps keep calling us. He asked, "How much money do you have? What did you do with the smashed door?" I said, "Fuck money and the door. I've been awake for 40 hours straight waiting for your call. You know enough about me. I miss you. Why do you ask about me? How are you doing, you?" He said he had lost weight, 7 to 8 kilograms. We both laughed because he had tried before and had not been able to lose the weight. But our laughter was bitter. He said, I talk to you and Soren every night until I fall asleep. He didn't talk about his days. There was no time. These short phone calls during this horrible time don't allow us to even make complete sentences. Besides, our conversation was interrupted every 2 sentences by an automated voice repeating, "You are currently in conversation with the great Tehran prison." After the last repetitive, meaningless automated message, Farshid said, "I love you." It was no doubt the best "I love you" I had ever heard. From November 5th, 2022. Fashofuye has lots of dogs, as many as you wish for, especially in the unpaved, gray, dusty, isolated parking lot of the prison, which is full of sadness. It's impossible to get off the car and not be welcomed by a limping or blind, drooling dog. The first time I saw them, I was terrified. I waited a bit for it to leave. It didn't. It looked into my eyes. I looked back and took a step closer. It didn't move. I moved closer. It still didn't move. I was anxious for the visit and wanted to hand in some clothes for Farshid. I asked the dog, "Can you please let me go?" It did. Exactly like a person, it moved a bit to the side and opened a path for me. And then he followed me with his eyes as long as it could. The second time I went to the prison, I was not shocked. I noticed the dogs behaved like this around all the visitors. The moment a new car arrived, they would come close to welcome it, waiting there for the visitor to get off, for the visitor and the dog to chat for a bit, and then they would follow the visitors as they got going. The third time, when I had to wait there for around 8 hours to hand in some books, clothes, and a power of attorney, I noticed how the dogs wandered around the people, watched them, got sad with their tears, and wagged their tails with their laughters. It's as if they too were anxious. Sometimes they even walked alongside the visitors as they stood in line for handing in the clothes. They even got angry when the soldiers shouted, "Those arrested during the protests are allowed visits only every other week." I guess the Fashofuye dogs are pets to us, the sorrowful humans. The dogs are carrying our burdens on their shoulders and have limped here to sympathize with the prisoners' families. You might not believe this, but in that little autumn prison courtyard, the dogs and humans are grieving together, wishing for freedom together. This next piece is from Zia Nabavi, who is a sociologist, who was never able to actually graduate from his master's program because he was banned from continuing his studies. Born in 1983, he has been arrested several times. Now he is outside the prison, but he has a sentence, and he awaits his time to go back inside. And since the new protests started, he has been writing these kind of like guidance letters to families of prisoners about his time in the prison and what they need to do. So this is from Zia Nabavi. For those who have a friend or beloved detained or imprisoned, every early morning, he would come and sit on the metal bench in front of the phone booth and stared at the phone with looks filled with love. Or maybe I read this in his face because I knew the story of his life. The truth is, he was arrested only a few days after his engagement party. He had been held for a month in the Information Ministry's detention center before being transferred to the prison. I imagined that he had sprouted wings when he saw the phone. He needed the phone more than anyone in our prison ward. Perhaps his biggest worry was about his fiance's family. Her father was in the military, and well, it would be possible that he wouldn't let his daughter marry a political prisoner. This was something he could not resolve, at least not until he was inside the prison. If there was any hope for him, it was in the few short moments mediated by the phone. There was, of course, his missing her too, perhaps even more than his need to resolve the issue with his future father-in-law, though the two were not really separate. It was the heartsick that made the issue loom larger, and it was the worry that added fire to his heartsick. I remember that I took notice of the guy's behavior when I was in charge of the phone, that he would come from early dawn and sit in front of the phone booth, throwing a begging glance at the other prisoners, as if saying, "Can you give me part of your 5-minute phone time?" Honestly, there was some weakness and restlessness in him that I didn't like. I mean, I was afraid that he would not adjust to the rough prison environment, and the restlessness would bring him consequences, and it eventually did. One early morning, when we were allowed to come outside, in the loneliness of our timeout, he stepped towards the telephone booth, struggled to bend some of the wires securing the phone machine in the booth, put his hand in the locked booth, and finally succeeded to pull out the phone receiver. I don't remember how long that imprisoned friend talked, and I don't recall what his punishment was for this act of disobedience. But I wanted to recount this memory to show the value and significance of the phone for the prisoners. I have heard several prisoners recount a nightmare in which they reached an empty phone booth, but as they were basking in their luck, they realized they didn't have a phone card with them. This last piece is one of the notes this other writer and ethno-musicologist who is also now studying psychology. She has been sharing some posts on Instagrams, and this is one of her posts from Sahar Sakhoi. October 20th, 2022. I wrote that it was death that turned the pictures black and white. The wise man reminded me that being alive didn't necessitate colors. I asked, what would we do then to feel alive? He said, do you feel pain? Do you feel pain seeing the cut hair of the girl standing at her mother's grave? And this is referencing a picture of the daughter of one of the women who was killed by the Iranian government. There's a picture of her standing by the grave, and she has cut her hair, and she's just holding her hair in her hand. I said, I don't know anything other than pain. There's a cry in me that is in the eastern redbud at the beginning of spring, cuts through the tree's bark and blooms. The cry that sings, the caravan passes, upon the redbud flowers, the young martyred cedar leads the caravan. He said, "You are alive. We are alive. Pain abounds even in smiling faces, even in the bare dreams of the future." I said, "Fear. Are we allowed to have fear?" The wise man replied, "If a bullet is aimed at the temple of life and you want to stay alive, then not fearing is a crime." I asked, "What about crying? Can we cry? Are we allowed to cry?" The wise man wiped his eyes clean of tears, looked at the far distance and said, "It's the tears that wet the dry path to the future so that imagination is born. It's the tears that turn the desert of yesterday into the sea of future. Cry and run. Feel the pain and be hopeful. Look at the eyes of the girl holding her cut hair in her hand and believe that blood is not shed in vain." I accepted his words. There was no other choice. Shedding tears, I stepped onto the border of life and death and forgot that from our homeland we now held in hand a bird with bloody feathers, a bird that was our cut hair. I thought about the eyes of the girl standing tall with her cut hair, and suddenly the sun rose. I'm going to just read a few pages from Translating House 1. This book, I wrote this after the 2009 protests, and going back to it now, I have been thinking about the circular movement between reality and literature. How this book was inspired by the protests in 2009. I wrote about them both as nonfiction and fiction. And then it seems things that are happening today in the streets are also in conversation with the book. So there is like this constant thread between reality and literature. I want to start in the aftershock, the aftermath, the afterworld. I want to start with the slippery, the intangible. I want to start with the impenetrable, the incomprehensible. I want to start with the world of dreams. But I will not reveal it all now. I will not tell the whole now, because the whole only becomes the whole in parts, in conversation with the parts, dispersed in time, in space, arrived at only through passage. Suffice it to say for now that dreams matter, that they are the heart of the matter, translated from one plane to another, one language to another, from the conscious to the unconscious, back to the conscious. They remain illegible, they carry the secret. Outside the window, the city moves. She's on a bus in the women-only section. She knows the city and she doesn't know the city. She sees the city outside the bus windows and she reads the city in the newspaper on her lap. The city is disappearing, dying. The city is resisting, being born. It dies every second. It comes back to life every second after. The city keeps reappearing. The city is gaining more presence. Inside her, a very loud silence. The city is disintegrating. Outside her, noises. A map. Create a map before the city falls apart. She hears a ghostly voice and turns around. Nobody is saying anything. I desire for her to create a map that can reinvent itself every time the city does. A secret map, a personal map, an internal map, a map in words, a map in tongues. Today, the city is not what it was yesterday. Tomorrow, it won't be what it is today. The map needs to be continuously rebirthed. New places, new names, new roads, new lines, like cells, like veins of her body, of my body, of the bodies of the women and men on the bus. of the bodies of the women and men outside the bus, of the bodies in the city making the text. The map of the city is to be drawn with words. The map is the text is the map, the text is the city, but even that will not remain stable. Even that will be forever changing. The text breathes, the text grows, the text decomposes, the city grows and dies and dies and grows. The city decomposes, the city breathes. Corpse 33. The blame is always elsewhere. She turns around. Everyone is looking outside. Everyone is looking inside. Nobody is saying anything. Traffic has come to a halt. The bus is stuck, not moving, idling. Outside, people have gathered, are waiting. She looks out to see. Other women too. Someone calls out to the bus driver to open the doors. He does. Some leave out the front door, out the back door. She cranes her neck. A cow is slaughtered in the middle of the square. She sees a big banner covering several store signs. We welcome a new police mission for social order, it says. We are the store owners. We are they. They welcome the new mission. They welcome the order. They have the cow killed. They have the cow sacrificed. A sacrifice for gratitude, for thankfulness. The city will be cleansed of addicts, vagrants, beggars, peddlers, of the vicious and immoral. Traffic laws will be better implemented. The new mission will improve the lives of the citizens and the city. Better days will come. The city will become pure. Corpse 1. Age 23. Gender male. Date shot 25th of Khordad 1388, 15th of June 2009. Place shot Tehran. Date of death 18th of Aban 1390, 9th of November 2011. Place of death Boston. Time of death unknown. Cause of death shrapnel residue in brain tissue. Date of burial 30th of Day 1390, 20th of January 2012. Place of burial Berlin. Silence, protest, scattered slogans. Armed forces marching on the rooftop of a Basij base. The protest continues. Slogans are repeated, shouted in louder voices. Tear gas, bullets, snipers, blood, bodies. He rushes to help. He unwraps the scarf around his neck and sits down to tie it around the wound on another protester's leg. More bullets. When he stands and turns to call for his friend, he is shot in the head, in the forehead. Blood, ground, darkness. He's taken to the hospital. He's taken into surgery immediately. Hands, tubes, gloves, instruments. Pieces of shrapnel are taken out. Pieces remain in the brain. Bandages. He falls into a coma. Family unaware of his location. His parents are divorced. The father is said to be affiliated with regime forces. The father and son are said to have been distant. The mother, a housewife. 5 sisters, all older. 1 brother, deceased, a martyr of the Iran-Iraq war. The family looks for him, the mother and sisters. Prison inmate lists. He's not on any of them. The medical examiner's office, prison morgues. The sister checks dozens of crushed faces and dead bodies. To no avail. His body is not found. Hospitals. Hospital officials tell the sister in hushed voices the corpses are removed by the police. No name, no identity, no record, no evidence. After the surgery, he remains in a hospital as a man injured in an accident. Fears of his being found, arrested, and removed. Fears of the hospital staff being charged with cooperation with the opposition forces. The staff wants the tubes disconnected. The doctor will not allow it. The body lies there silent. The family searches. He comes out of the coma a month or so later. Symptoms: memory loss, unable to control the excretion of feces, needs tubes, unable to talk properly, partially paralyzed. He regains part of his memory. He cannot yet speak. The doctor provides him with a pen and paper. He writes down numbers, the phone number of one of his sisters. The family finds him. For his safety, he is immediately discharged. At home, he rests. As if a baby helpless, he is cared for. Family, doctors, speech therapy, physiotherapy, a second surgery on the brain. The family moves for safety, for peace of mind, so that they can pay his hospital bills. 7 to 8 months later, he's partially recovered. He still suffers amnesia. He regains some speech. He still suffers seizures. The family arranges for him to leave the country. He's a witness of the silent protest, of the silent bullets. Destination Turkey. He goes to the movies, to internet cafes, speaks and laughs, falls silent from time to time, suffers headaches, does not receive needed medical attention. Months later, refugee status accepted. He hopes to go to Germany, where he has family. The UN offers him refugee status in the US. The family requests to send someone with him to care for him there. Request is denied. Destination Boston. The son arrives in Boston, alone, penniless, some support from other immigrants, limited medical care for 6 months, no special care, nothing after 6 months. He repeatedly loses sensation in his limbs, suffers seizure, and has to go to the hospital. He's not admitted. He cannot afford to pay. He's told he might not have long to live. He grows depressed. He hopes to eventually leave the US to join a sister who left Iran after the protests, after the search, after the pain, who now lives in Malaysia. He lives 8 months in Boston. He chats regularly with the sister in Malaysia. One day she doesn't find him on the other side of the screen. Absence, silence. He has been taken to the hospital. She finds out through his friends. Silence, death. An autopsy is performed on the body. He has had a brain hemorrhage. The mother wishes to see the second son she has lost before he is buried. The family does not want to risk transferring the corpse back to Iran. Fear of the body being confiscated, fear of complications for the funeral and the survivors. The mortuary cooler in Boston is his home for countless days. His body rests alone. The mother cannot travel to the US. The mother wishes to see her son one last time. The mother wants her son to be buried where he has family, Germany. His body decomposes. The German government facilitates the transfer of the body. The German government issues a visa for the mother. The body travels, the mother travels. After about 2 months in the solitary confinement of a cooler in Boston, the body is buried in Berlin. Red tulips, white roses and lilies, pale orchids, a light brown casket, family and acquaintances and activists, a black and white picture of him smiling, young and full of life. The family remains silent until his death, fear of his arrest, fear of his torture, fear of losing him once again. Following his death, they speak. The sister living in Malaysia speaks and tells the story. She continues to follow up on his case with human rights organizations. Within the borders of Iran, the family announces a fake cause of death in order to hold a ceremony. They mourn a son killed in a made-up accident, not a son lost to bullets. They mourn and recite his name in hushed voices. He is not to be talked about. In Turkey, refugees who knew him from his time there hold a small ceremony. Wonder what his destiny would have been if his request to be sent to Germany had been accepted. The mother speaks. A while later, the mother cries, speaks of his wishes in life, to become a diver, to work on large ships, to take care of his mother. of him telling her on that protest day that he was going to see a movie with friends, going to see his father later to get some money, going to stay at his aunt's afterward, of finding out in the small hours of the day that he didn't go to his aunt's, of later learning the details of the protest, of the search, of the prayers and cries, of him contacting them after the coma, of the 36 baton scars on his back, of his bloody clothes sticking to his skin, of him surviving only because he was an athlete, of sending him abroad to save him from any further harm, of his being sent to the US, of the rejection of his sister's request to travel with him, of their connection through the internet, of his refugee pension being too little too late, of her sending him money, of his hard life, what he ate, what he wore, of his being alone, his loneliness, his homesickness, of his medication, of his laughter, of her long-distance phone card running out of minutes, of telling him she'd buy a new car and call him later so he didn't have to pay, of being given the news, of that next call never happening, of the decision to bury him in Berlin, of not wanting her child's body to be displaced in Iran, of wishing they had stayed together in Turkey for what had remained of his life. The mother speaks, the mother cries. My elder son went to the battlefield to defend the soul of Iran and was killed, but I could not bury his younger brother in Iran's soul, the mother says. He was the youngest child, beloved by all. He is survived by his mother, his father, and his sisters. Corpse 19, Missing Links. How to bear the void, how to bear loss on one's skin, on one's hair, on one's lashes, on one's nails, on one's nerves, on one's cells, in one's heart, on one's tongue. How to translate loss into language, how to survive loss. What is at the center of loss, at the center of life after loss? How much time needs to pass before mourning can become healing, can become living? How can we walk the distance that separates you and me, you and us, who became one and the other because a shared experience exploded into an abyss of unshared history, memory, story? How can we walk the distance and arrive on the other side, alive and generous, capable of light and love, reaching in and reaching out with a touch and a tone that can make joy and be joy? Are we, as we walk, leaving the dead behind? Are we leaving ourselves behind? What about guilt? What about shame? Mine and yours, ours and yours. How to bear memory, how to bear witness. I'm just going to pause here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's hear it once more for both readers, and thank you all again for joining us this evening.